I thought my mother-in-law's constant worry about my children's health was just grandmother's love. I never imagined that the woman who kissed their foreheads goodnight was the same one slipping dangerous medications into their food, slowly poisoning them to frame me as an unfit mother. When I realized the truth, I knew that stopping her would require the fight of my life. The first time my daughter collapsed, I thought it was just childhood illness. 8-year-old Lily had been complaining of stomach aches and dizziness for weeks, but children get sick all the time. When she fainted during her dance recital, crashing to the stage floor in front of hundreds of horrified parents, I rushed her to the emergency room with my heart pounding in terror. Her blood sugar is dangerously low, the doctor explained, his face grave with concern. Has she been eating normally? Any changes in appetite or behavior? I racked my brain, trying to remember any warning signs I might have missed. Lily had been more tired lately, less interested in playing outside, but I had attributed it to school stress and growing pains. She has been eating fine, I told the doctor, my voice shaking with fear and guilt. Maybe a little less than usual, but nothing alarming. My husband David arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, his face pale with worry. Behind him came his mother, Margaret, looking every inch the concerned grandmother with her perfectly styled silver hair, an expensive handbag clutched tightly in her manicured hands. "Oh, my poor baby," Margaret cried, rushing to Lily's bedside and stroking her granddaughter's pale cheek. I knew something was wrong. I have been telling everyone that this child was not getting proper care. The words hit me like a slap. What do you mean, not getting proper care? Margaret's blue eyes filled with tears that seemed genuine. Sweetheart, I did not want to say anything, but Lily has been telling me she feels sick a lot. She said you tell her she is fine when she complains about her tummy hurting. That is not true, I said, my voice rising with indignation. Lily tells me when she does not feel well, and I take care of her. Of course you do, dear, Margaret said soothingly, but there was something in her tone that made my skin crawl. You are doing your best. It is just that sometimes mothers are so busy they miss the signs. David looked between his mother and me, confusion and worry written across his features. Mom, what are you talking about? Sarah is an excellent mother. Oh, I know she tries, Margaret said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. But she works so much, and the children spend so much time in daycare. Sometimes I worry they are not getting the attention they need at home. I felt like I was being attacked from all sides. My daughter was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, and my mother-in-law was using the crisis to plant seeds of doubt about my parenting abilities. The doctor returned with test results that made my blood run cold. We found traces of insulin in Lily's system, he said carefully. Does she have diabetes? Any family history we should know about? No, I said, my mind racing. No diabetes, no family history. How is that possible? Sometimes insulin can be administered accidentally, the doctor said, his eyes serious. We will need to run more tests to determine the source. Margaret gasped dramatically. Oh my goodness, could this be related to her diet? Sarah, you have been giving the children those protein bars and health drinks. Could there be something in those supplements? I stared at her in shock. The protein bars and health drinks were something Margaret had recommended, claiming they would help the children grow strong and healthy. She had been bringing them to our house for months, always making sure the kids had their special snacks from Grandma. Those are the bars you brought, I said slowly. You said they were organic and healthy. Well, yes, Margaret said, looking confused and hurt. I bought them at the health food store, but perhaps I should have read the labels more carefully. Oh, I feel terrible if I caused this. But something in her expression did not match her words. There was a flicker of something cold and calculating in her eyes before she resumed her mask of grandmotherly concern. Lily recovered after 2 days in the hospital, but the incident left me shaken and suspicious. I started paying closer attention to my children's health, documenting everything they ate, how they felt, and when symptoms appeared. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Both Lily and her 6-year-old brother Max had been experiencing mysterious symptoms for months. Stomach aches, dizziness, fatigue, and occasional nausea that came and went without any clear pattern. Symptoms that always seemed to improve when they were away from home for extended periods, like when they went to summer camp or stayed overnight with friends. But the symptoms always returned after they had been home for a day or two, especially after visits from Grandma Margaret. I started keeping a detailed journal, noting every symptom, every meal, every interaction. The pattern that emerged was terrifying in its clarity. The children's mysterious illnesses always peaked after Margaret's visits. She would bring them special treats, health drinks, vitamins, and snacks, always insisting that growing children needed extra nutrition. She would personally serve them their snacks, often shooing me away with comments about how busy I was and how she wanted to spend quality time with her grandchildren. Within hours of Margaret's visits, one or both children would develop symptoms. Never severe enough to require hospitalization like Lily's collapse, but consistent enough to create a pattern of chronic illness that was slowly undermining their health and my reputation as a mother. I researched the symptoms online and discovered they were consistent with various types of medication poisoning. Low doses of certain drugs could cause exactly the kind of chronic illness my children were experiencing without being immediately life-threatening. The realization that someone might be deliberately poisoning my children was so horrific that I initially rejected it. But as I continued documenting the pattern, the evidence became undeniable. Margaret was slowly poisoning my children. But why would a grandmother harm her own grandchildren? What could she possibly gain from making them sick? The answer came to me during a family dinner at Margaret's house 3 weeks after Lily's hospitalization. David had inherited his father's successful construction company when his dad died 5 years earlier, and the business was worth millions. Margaret had been bitter about the inheritance, feeling that as the widow, she should have maintained control of the company. "You know," Margaret said casually as we sat around her dining table, "I have been thinking about David's will. With the children having these health problems, maybe we should discuss making some changes." David looked up from his plate, confusion written across his face. "What kind of changes?" "Well," Margaret continued, her voice carefully neutral, "if something happened to you and Sarah, who would take care of the children? Given their recent health issues, they would need someone with the resources and experience to handle their medical needs." "Mom, the kids are fine," David said firmly. "Lily's episode was scary, but the doctors said it was an isolated incident." "Was it though?" Margaret asked, her eyebrows raised in concern. "Both children have been sick on and off for months. Poor little Max threw up 3 times last week. And Lily is so pale and tired all the time." She was right about the symptoms, but hearing her catalog them so precisely made my suspicions crystallize into certainty. Margaret was not just aware of the children's illnesses, she was causing them. "I think Sarah should take the children to see a specialist," Margaret continued. "Maybe a pediatric endocrinologist or a gastroenterologist. These ongoing health issues are concerning." David nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe you are right. We should get them thoroughly checked out." I realized with growing horror that Margaret was building a case. She was poisoning my children to create a medical history of chronic illness, then positioning herself as the concerned grandmother who was trying to get them proper medical care, while I was portrayed as a negligent mother who was missing the signs. "Actually," Margaret said, as if the thought had just occurred to her, "I have been researching pediatric specialists, and I found several excellent doctors who specialize in children with chronic illnesses. I could make some appointments." "That would be great, Mom," David said gratefully. "You are so good at this kind of research." I watched Margaret's face as she accepted David's praise, and I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Satisfaction. She was enjoying this, enjoying the manipulation and the praise for her apparent concern. That night, after we returned home and put the children to bed, I confronted David with my suspicions. "I think your mother is poisoning the children," I said without preamble. David stared at me as if I had lost my mind. "What are you talking about?" "The pattern of their illnesses, the timing with her visits, the way she pushes those health drinks and supplements on them." I showed him my journal, pointing out the correlation between Margaret's visits and the children's symptoms. "Sarah, this is insane," David said, shaking his head. "You are talking about my mother. She loves those kids more than anything in the world." "Does she?" I asked. "Or does she love the idea of controlling them? Think about it, David. She has been bitter about your father's will ever since he died. She has always resented that you inherited the business instead of her. That has nothing to do with the children. It has everything to do with the children, I pressed. If something happened to us, who would get custody of the kids? Who would control their inheritance? David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. You think she would hurt her own grandchildren for money? I think she would hurt anyone for money and control, I said. And I think she has been slowly poisoning them to make them chronically ill, so she can position herself as their primary caregiver and eventually gain control of their inheritance. This is crazy, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. Even if what you are suggesting were true, how would we prove it? We test everything she gives them, I said. We document everything, and we keep the children away from her until we know for sure. David was resistant at first, torn between loyalty to his mother and concern for his children. But when Max collapsed at school the next week, vomiting violently and barely conscious, David's doubts began to crumble. The hospital found traces of antihistamine in Max's system, far more than would be appropriate for a child his age. When the doctor asked about any medications Max might have taken, I remembered that Margaret had given him what she called natural allergy medicine that morning before school. Where is this medicine now? The doctor asked. My mother-in-law gave it to him, I said. She said it was herbal and safe for children. The doctor's expression grew serious. We will need to test any medications or supplements the child has been taking. This level of antihistamine could be dangerous, especially for a child his size. I called Margaret from the hospital, asking her to bring the allergy medicine she had given Max. She arrived within an hour, looking appropriately concerned, and carrying a small bottle of what appeared to be children's allergy medication. I feel terrible, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. I just wanted to help with his seasonal allergies. I had no idea it could make him sick. But when the hospital tested the medication, they found it had been tampered with. The concentration of antihistamine was far higher than what the label indicated, high enough to cause serious illness in a child. This medication has been altered, the doctor told us grimly. Someone has added additional antihistamine to increase the potency. This is not something that would happen by accident. Margaret gasped in shock. How is that possible? I bought it directly from the pharmacy. Ma'am, the doctor said carefully, did you handle this medication after purchasing it? Add anything to it or transfer it to a different container? Of course not, Margaret said, her voice shaking with apparent distress. I would never do anything to harm my grandchildren. But I was watching her carefully now, and I caught something the others missed. When the doctor was not looking, Margaret's expression shifted for just a moment. The mask of grandmotherly concern slipped, and I saw cold calculation in her eyes. She was not shocked by the news that the medication had been tampered with. She was shocked that she had been caught. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to catch Margaret in the act, and I was going to make sure she faced consequences for what she had done to my children. I installed hidden cameras throughout our house, focusing on the kitchen and dining areas where Margaret typically served the children their special snacks and drinks. I also began secretly collecting samples of everything she gave them, storing them in sealed containers for future testing. The evidence I gathered over the next 2 weeks was damning. The cameras captured Margaret slipping pills into the children's drinks when she thought no one was watching. I saw her adding powder to their food, always when my back was turned or when David was out of the room. She was systematic and careful, but not careful enough to avoid the hidden cameras. The samples I collected tested positive for various medications: insulin, antihistamines, mild sedatives, and even small amounts of blood pressure medication. None of the doses were immediately lethal, but together they created a pattern of chronic illness that was slowly destroying my children's health. But the most damning evidence came from Margaret's own mouth. I had installed a voice recorder in my purse, and during one of her visits, I managed to get her talking about the children's health issues. I am so worried about them, I said, playing the concerned mother perfectly. The doctors cannot figure out what is wrong, and they keep getting sicker. Well, Margaret said, her voice taking on that tone I had learned to recognize. Sometimes children have underlying health conditions that do not show up right away. Maybe they have inherited some genetic issues. What kind of genetic issues? Oh, metabolic disorders, autoimmune problems, that sort of thing, Margaret said casually. Children with those kinds of issues often need special care, someone who really understands their medical needs. Like who? Well, someone with experience dealing with chronic illness. Someone who has the resources to provide proper medical care. She paused meaningfully. Someone like me. Do you think they will get better? I asked, my heart pounding as I recorded her response. Honestly, Margaret said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. I think they are going to need long-term management. These kinds of health problems do not just go away. They will probably need someone to take care of them for the rest of their lives. What if something happened to David and me? Who would take care of them then? Well, Margaret said, and I could practically hear her smile. I suppose I would have to step in. I am their grandmother, after all, and I am the one who really understands their medical needs. I would make sure they got the best possible care. The recording was everything I needed to prove Margaret's motive. She was poisoning my children to make them chronically ill, positioning herself as their primary caregiver, and planning to gain control of their inheritance when David and I were no longer in the picture. But I needed more than just evidence of her crimes. I needed a plan that would not only stop her, but ensure she faced full consequences for what she had done to my innocent children. I started by secretly taking both children to a pediatric toxicologist, a specialist who could test for the specific poisons Margaret had been using. The doctor was horrified by what he found. These children have been systematically poisoned over a period of months, he told me, his face grave with concern. The combination of medications in their systems could have caused permanent damage, or even death if it had continued much longer. Will they recover? I asked, my voice breaking with emotion. With proper treatment and no further exposure to these substances, yes, they should recover completely, the doctor assured me. But we need to identify the source of the poisoning immediately. I know the source, I said, and I told him everything. The doctor insisted that we involve the police immediately. Poisoning children is a serious felony, and the systematic nature of Margaret's crimes made it even more severe. But I wanted to catch her in the act, to make sure there was no possibility of her claiming innocence or blaming someone else for the poisoning. I worked with the police to set up a sting operation. They installed professional surveillance equipment in my house, and coached me on how to create a situation where Margaret would poison the children while being recorded by multiple cameras. The plan was simple but effective. I would invite Margaret over for dinner, then create an excuse to leave her alone with the children in the kitchen. The police would be monitoring everything in real time from a van parked down the street. Margaret arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, carrying her usual bag of special treats for the children. She seemed relaxed and confident, probably thinking that her systematic poisoning had been so subtle that no one suspected her. "How are my precious babies feeling today?" she asked, hugging Lily and Max with apparent affection. "They have been doing better," I said carefully. The new vitamins the doctor prescribed seemed to be helping. "Oh, that is wonderful," Margaret said, but I caught a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Though children's health can be so unpredictable. Sometimes they seem better for a while. Then the symptoms come back worse than before. "I suppose that is true," I agreed, playing along with her script. As planned, I excused myself to take a phone call in the other room, leaving Margaret alone with the children in the kitchen. Through the hidden cameras, the police and I watched as she immediately went to work. She pulled a small vial from her purse and began adding drops of liquid to the children's juice cups. Then she took out what appeared to be powder and sprinkled it into their sandwiches, carefully smoothing the bread back down to hide the evidence. "There you go, my darlings," she said sweetly to Lily and Max. "Grandma made your snacks extra special today." The children, trusting their grandmother completely, began eating the poisoned food without hesitation. I had to bite my tongue to keep from rushing into the kitchen and stopping them. The police had assured me that they would intervene before the children consumed enough poison to cause serious harm. But watching my babies eat food that I knew was contaminated was the hardest thing I had ever done. Just as Lily was about to take another bite of her sandwich, the police burst through the front door. "Police! Nobody move!" Margaret's face went white with shock and fear. The vial of poison slipped from her hand and shattered on the kitchen floor, spreading its contents across the tile. "Step away from the children, ma'am," the lead detective ordered, his gun drawn but pointed at the floor. Margaret looked around frantically, her mask of grandmotherly concern finally slipping completely. "I do not know what you think you are doing, but this is a mistake." "Ma'am, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of 2 children," the detective said, pulling out his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." "This is insane," Margaret screamed, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "I am their grandmother. I love these children." "Ma'am, we have video evidence of you poisoning their food just now," the detective replied calmly. "We also have evidence that you have been systematically poisoning these children for months." As the handcuffs clicked around Margaret's wrists, she looked directly at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You little witch," she hissed. "You have ruined everything. Those children should be mine. David should have left them to me." "David is not dead," I said quietly. "And even if he were, you would never get custody of my children. Not after what you have done to them." "I did what was necessary," Margaret snarled, her true nature finally revealed. "Those children are worth millions, and I deserve that money more than some working-class nobody who trapped my son into marriage." The police recorded every word of her confession, sealing her fate completely. Margaret was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder, child endangerment, aggravated assault, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Video recordings of her poisoning the children, medical records showing systematic poisoning over months, recorded confessions of her motives, and physical evidence of the tampered medications. Her lawyer tried to claim that she was suffering from dementia or mental illness, but psychological evaluations showed that she was completely competent and had planned her crimes carefully over an extended period. The trial was a media sensation. The story of a grandmother who poisoned her own grandchildren for inheritance money shocked the community and made national news. During the trial, even more evidence emerged about Margaret's true character. The prosecution revealed that she had been stealing money from David's business for years, embezzling funds through fake invoices and inflated expenses. She had also taken out life insurance policies on both David and me without our knowledge, naming herself as the beneficiary. Margaret's plan had been comprehensive and chilling. She intended to slowly poison the children until they became chronically ill, then position herself as their primary caregiver. Once she had established herself as essential to their care, she planned to eliminate David and me, either through more sophisticated poisoning or staged accidents. With us dead and the children dependent on her for their medical needs, she would gain control of David's multimillion-dollar business and the children's inheritance. The poisoning would continue until the children eventually died from their chronic illnesses, leaving Margaret as the sole heir to the entire family fortune. The testimony about her plan was so shocking that several jurors were visibly shaken. Margaret had been willing to slowly torture and eventually murder her own grandchildren for money. David was devastated by the revelations about his mother. He had loved her, trusted her, and never suspected that she was capable of such evil. The knowledge that she had been poisoning his children while he praised her as a devoted grandmother broke his heart. "I brought her into our home," he said to me one night, tears streaming down his face. "I let her have access to our children. I praised her for caring about them when she was actually trying to kill them." "You could not have known," I told him, holding him as he grieved for the mother he thought he had known. "She was manipulative and calculating. She fooled everyone." "But I should have listened to you," David said. "When you told me something was wrong, I should have believed you instead of defending her." The trial lasted 3 weeks, and Margaret was found guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, calling her crimes among the most heinous acts of betrayal and child abuse he had ever encountered. "You systematically poisoned innocent children who loved and trusted you," the judge said at sentencing. "You used their love as a weapon against them, exploiting their trust to carry out a plan that would have resulted in their deaths. There is no rehabilitation for someone who would torture children for financial gain." Margaret showed no remorse even as she was sentenced. She continued to maintain that she had done nothing wrong, that the children belonged to her, and that I had somehow orchestrated the entire situation to frame her. Her complete lack of empathy or understanding of her crimes confirmed that the life sentence was appropriate. She was a predator who had targeted the most vulnerable members of her own family, and she would have continued killing if she had not been stopped. The children recovered completely from the poisoning, though it took several months of medical treatment to fully clear the toxins from their systems. More importantly, they received counseling to help them process the betrayal by someone they had loved and trusted. Why did Grandma try to hurt us? Lily asked me one day, her 8-year-old mind struggling to understand such adult evil. Because she was sick in her heart. I told her. Sometimes people get so focused on money and control that they forget how to love. But that sickness was in her, not in you. You did nothing wrong. Will she ever get better? Max asked. I do not think so, sweetheart, I said honestly. But she cannot hurt you anymore. She will never be able to hurt you or any other children again. David restructured his business to prevent any future embezzlement and created a trust fund for the children that could not be accessed by anyone outside our immediate family. We also updated our wills to ensure that if anything happened to us, the children would be cared for by people we trusted completely. Margaret's crimes had a profound impact on our community. Parents became more aware of the signs of poisoning and abuse, and several other cases of family members harming children for financial gain were discovered and prosecuted. The case also led to changes in inheritance law, making it more difficult for people to gain control of children's assets through manipulation or fraud. But the most important outcome was that my children were safe. They learned that they could trust me to protect them, even when the threat came from someone they loved. They learned that family loyalty must be earned through love and protection, not simply expected because of blood relationships. Margaret sits in prison now, serving her life sentence for the attempted murder of her own grandchildren. She has tried to appeal her conviction multiple times, claiming that she was framed or that the evidence was fabricated, but every appeal has been denied. She will never see her grandchildren again, never have the opportunity to harm another child, never gain control of the fortune she was willing to kill for. Sometimes I think about the woman I thought I knew, the grandmother who seemed to love my children. But that woman was never real. She was a mask worn by a predator who saw children as obstacles to wealth and power. The real Margaret was the woman who carefully measured poison into my children's food, who smiled as she watched them suffer, who planned their deaths as casually as planning a grocery list. My children are 9 and 7 now, healthy and happy, with no lasting physical effects from their grandmother's attempts to murder them. They remember Margaret only vaguely, more like a bad dream than a real person who once held them and told them she loved them. They have learned that love is proven through actions, not words, and that true family protects each other rather than exploiting each other for personal gain. Margaret's plan failed completely. Instead of gaining control of our family fortune, she lost everything: her freedom, her family, her reputation, and any hope of the wealth she had been willing to kill for. She gambled with the lives of innocent children and lost everything she ever cared about. That is the only justice worthy of someone who would poison their own grandchildren for money. Her life sentence is not just punishment for her crimes. It is protection for every child she might have harmed in the future. Some people are too dangerous to ever be released, and Margaret proved that beyond any doubt. She wanted to play games with my children's lives, to use them as pawns in her twisted quest for wealth and control. Instead, she discovered that a mother's love is more powerful than any scheme, and that justice, when it finally comes, is absolute and final. Margaret will spend the rest of her life paying for her crimes against my children, and that is exactly what she deserves. If you enjoyed this shocking story of a grandmother who tried to murder her own grandchildren for money, make sure to subscribe to Revenge Janet. Hit that notification bell, so you never miss a story where the most twisted family betrayals meet the justice they deserve. Share your own revenge stories in the comments below. Your story could be featured in our next video. Remember, at Revenge Janet, we believe that those who harm children deserve the harshest consequences, and justice always finds its way to protect the innocent. Subscribe now and join our community where karma serves life sentences to those who deserve them most.